Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the October California High-Speed Rail Authority board meeting. My name is Nancy Miller. I am the vice chair, and I'm presiding today because our chair, Tom Richards, is unavailable by audio. He is in our meeting listening, however. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Thank you. Director Shank,
Present.
Chair Richards, Director Camacho,
Present.
Vice Chair Miller,
Here.
Assembly Member Rambula, Director Preya, Director Guillemette,
Present.
Director Escutia,
Here.
Director Williams, Director Pena.
Here.
Madam Vice Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much. And before we get started, we will have the flag salute. So please join me in that once our flag comes up. Or I think you face north. So let's just start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
States of America.
and to the
The
republic
Republic
which
for which it
stands
stands,
one
one
nation
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and
justice for all.
Thank you all very much. So we'll go to item number one, which is
I had a flag if we needed it.
good for you, Lynn. I was looking at the one I have flying right outside my window here. So item number one, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Thank you, Director Camacho, and second by Director Guillemette. Let's call the roll, please.
Director Shank,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Guillemette,
Yes.
Director Escutia,
Yes.
Director Pena.
Yes.
The motion carries, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. So we'll move to agenda item number two, which is our Northern California project update. And I'd like to ask,
Apologies, Madam Vice Chair.
oh, I'm
public
sorry.
comment?
Yes, please go through the public comment requirements. I'm sorry, Mo.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Welcome to the California High-Speed Rail Board of Directors monthly meeting. Today, we are hosting this meeting remotely via Zoom. In a moment, we will take public comment. First, we want to run through some important technical aspects of this meeting for offering public comment. If you are logged into this meeting via the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature, typically located at the bottom of your screen, so that I may call on you to provide your comment. If you're dialing in by phone, pressing #2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called in the order that their hand is raised. Once you've been in the queue and your name is called, in the web meeting, please click the prompt on your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. On the phone, we'll call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you'll hear a message that you are being unmuted. Once unmuted, it will be your turn to speak. Please slowly and clearly say and spell your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you represent. After your introduction, each speaker is allotted 2 minutes to provide their comment. I will interject at 1 minute and 45 seconds to provide a 15-second warning. Our court reporter is on the line to record these comments. If they need you to spell or repeat something, they may interject. I will notify you when your time is nearly up. At the end of your comment, we will disable your microphone. However, you are welcome to stay on the line to continue watching or listening to this meeting. Closed captioning has been made available for this meeting. The ability to download the closed captioning transcript has been disabled, as it is generated automatically by the computer and can be inaccurate. However, our court reporter is transcribing the meeting, and those transcripts will be made available upon request within 5 to 7 business days following this meeting. If you do not wish to provide comment and simply want to watch the meeting, you can do so by logging on to hsr.ca.gov and looking for the link to our live stream. And first up for public comment is Dr. Elizabeth Adams.
Dr. Adams?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Elizabeth Adams, Elizabeth Adams, Adams, and I am an engineering faculty at Fresno City College. And I would like to comment on the strategic communications, outreach, and engagement efforts that I've been a part of recently. Fresno City College serves more than 25,000 students each year in the Central Valley. And we are a minority serving institution, and the vast majority of our student population does come from underserved communities. And I've been fortunate to work with the I Will Ride program for the past several years, and it has been incredibly beneficial for students at Fresno City College, especially in our growing engineering program. Through this partnership, we've been able to organize California high-speed rail presentations within engineering classrooms on campus. Our students have been able to visit the High-Speed Rail Authority office in downtown Fresno for panel presentations and networking events. And we've even been fortunate enough to have guided tours of high-speed rail construction sites. The pandemic, of course, has disrupted some of our plans over the last year and a half. However, during that time, we kept the relationship going through virtual presentations, and I'm very excited to be able to share that tomorrow we will be holding our first in-person event since 2019 at the Fresno City College campus. These experiences have truly enhanced students' educational experiences by allowing them to meet and interact with technical professionals and to see firsthand this truly amazing example of what they can do with their own
15
careers.
seconds remaining.
Thank you. In engineering and technology. And so I really just want to commend Augie Blancas and Jacqueline Castro and their outreach and communication efforts. And continuation of this program, I strongly encourage, because it really does bring so many benefits to the community beyond that of the high-speed rail itself. And that's I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. We appreciate your comments. Next speaker.
Madam Vice Chair, next up for public comment, we have Dr. Beverly Scott.
Dr. Scott?
Thank you. I'm hoping that you can hear me. Wonderful. It's absolutely my pleasure. I am appearing as Beverly Scott, and I have a nonprofit introducing youth to American Infrastructure, Inc. But I'm also a member of your peer review committee. I'm the Fiona Ma is the one that appointed me. I've been in public transportation industry for over 40 years, and it's my pleasure to currently live here in California. And I want to really speak this morning. I'm going to give you your kudos when you are really deserving of them. The work that has been taking place on the part of high-speed rail has been unbelievable, particularly on the youth side. Okay, I can really speak to that. Miss Melissa Figueroa, and I'm giving the same shout out to Jacqueline Castro. You have a tremendous cadre of young people, and I just want to make sure that you really know it, who are truly our next generation, that you are really, really helping to educate, inform, inspire, and really motivate to understand the true multiplier impact that these types of investments wind up having in terms of driving positive incomes, positive outcomes for communities, for people, and for society overall. So what I'm liking about it is that the young people themselves are actually engaging. So what does that mean? Melissa and I did an international program. We'll speak about it a little bit later. It was a global program. They asked us to speak about socioeconomic impacts. Bottom line, Jacqueline Castro and your team were the ones that put that together. We said there are no international people that are going to be talking about equity and socioeconomic impacts, and we're not in the room. And so your young people did that. We have a program down in the Inland Empire right now. We've got
15 seconds remaining.
Okay, and so the bottom line is that Jacqueline and your We Ride are going to be literally talking to young people that are in the Inland Empire and all through Southern California about the work of California High-Speed Rail. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. I remember when you were in Sacramento running Sacramento Regional Transit, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you for those comments. Next speaker, please.
Madam Vice Chair, I just want the record to reflect that Assembly Member Rambula, Director Williams, and Director Perea have joined the meeting. Next up for public comment, we have Jessica Zink, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name.
Good morning. This is Jessica Zink. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Ms. Zink, we can. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. Again, my name is Jessica Zink, and I'm the Deputy Director within the Transportation Department for the City of San Jose. I wanted to speak this morning just to reinforce the opportunity that the City of San Jose, the state, and the High-Speed Rail Authority have to share our goal of a modernized, integrated, and passenger rail network that connects San Jose and the Central Valley, and ultimately the whole state of California. As background, San Jose is home to more than 1 million people and 180 square miles, and the California High-Speed Rail project spans 21 miles within our city limits. So it's very important to us. We've established a strong partnership with the High-Speed Rail Authority, perhaps best highlighted through our multi-agency partnership on the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan. That partnership is one in which High-Speed Rail and the city, as well as Caltrain, the Valley Transportation Authority, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission are reimagining our core station, Diridon Station, so that it can serve the needs of our region and state far into the future. We support in the near term, the immediate term, the authority's request to the legislature to release the remaining Prop 1A funding, and we really look forward to working together to securing federal and other funding as well. We've shown our commitment by leading a successful effort to secure billions in funding for high-speed rail and joint high-speed rail Caltrain modernization in the final Plan Bay Area 2050 strategies. We also very much support the authority and state in their ongoing work to secure access to the Union Pacific Railroad and have electrified service all the way from San Jose to Gilroy, as well as the
15
rest of the
seconds
Bay
remaining.
Area. With that, I will close with the fact that we see the build out of high-speed rail connecting San Jose with the economic centers in the Central Valley and Southern California as essential to the future of mobility, sustainability, and equitable development within the city and state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Zink. Next speaker.
Madam Vice Chair, next up for public comment, we have Anna Harvey.
Ms. Harvey?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Anna Harvey, A-N-N-A, Harvey, H-A-R-V-E-Y, and I'm with the Citywide Policy and Planning Division of the San Francisco Planning Department. On behalf of the city, I wanted to express our appreciation for the Northern California regional team's ongoing collaboration and attentive participation on a variety of efforts here in San Francisco, including participation on the Downtown Rail Extension's Integrated Program Management Team and Executive Steering Committee, as well as the Technical Advisory Group for the Pennsylvania Avenue Extension Grade Separation Project. We also want to express our appreciation for their clear communication and willingness to directly engage on our comments on the draft environmental document for San Francisco to San Jose. San Francisco is supportive of high-speed rail, and we look forward to a day when fast, clean, electrified rail arrives at the Salesforce Transit Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. Do we have another speaker?
Yes. Madam Vice Chair, next up for public comment, we have Andy Coons. Apologies.
Mr. Coons?
Yes, thank you. I'm Andy Coons, President and founder of the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association, and I'm here today to speak in favor of your advocacy and public relations division of the High-Speed Rail Authority. We've been working closely with Melissa and Alice and the team for quite a few years. we think that messaging is almost as more important than engineering when it comes to making the case for high-speed rail, especially given that there's so much misinformation out there and about the project and what it isn't and what it's not going to do and all that. So good messaging is extremely important. The public needs to hear on a regular basis what's going on, what's being built, the progress that's being made, the benefits that everybody can expect. We know these projects take time and they're painful to build, but the benefits are enormous. We've seen them all over the world, and we just want to encourage you to keep the public relations division going full speed. And all of the updates and the great videos and all that. It's enormously effective out here in the world where we're on these front lines fighting the battles about that high-speed rail is necessary for our future. So thank you all for all the work you're doing and for the great project that you're advancing.
Thank you, Mr. Kuntz. Appreciate those comments. Next speaker.
Madam Vice Chair, next up for public comment, we have Laura Udden.
Ms. Udden?
It's Laura Uden, and thank you for letting me participate today. I represent the U.S. Veterans Business Alliance. It was originally the Disabled Veteran Business Alliance, and the majority of our members are disabled veterans. I've been working with the high-speed rail and trying to improve the program in many ways, participating in projects, also on the Business Advisory Council, and working with Katrina Blair and prior chairs to try to address some of the issues impacting small businesses. I noticed that we have an agenda item today on small business goals, and I just wanted to provide some input to that, representing myself, my organization, and many people that I've spoken with who are small business owners. You're going to be talking today about the federal goals, utilization goals, and changing those to remove goals for small business and disabled veteran businesses. Obviously, as a disabled veteran business owner, I have a concern there. And I believe that there's no reason why we can't have goals for those. You can have an SDVOSB goal and an SBA small business goal on those, rather than removing those goals completely and stopping all work for firms like mine. And the FRA response to the initial lawsuit that set up the small business program allowed for those kinds of goals to be established. So I'm hoping that we are going to continue to find a way to do that rather than going forward without those. Similarly, the DBE goal it's a discussion to remove the DBE goal from state funded contracts. I know we have issues with Prop 209, but I believe there are other ways we can make that happen. Our goal is already very small at 10%. If we remove that goal from all state contracts, we're now going to end up with 5% or less on the program. Caltrans's goal for this year is 18%. I think we need to rethink where we're headed with our goals and how we can get there from here. It would help if we could clarify the funding approach also on the project, so we know which
15 seconds remaining.
State or federally funded. These have huge impacts to our small businesses. Our recommendation is that you federalize all the contracts, and that way you can have all of the goals on all of the contracts, or at least as many as possible. Right now, we have a real problem with impacts to small business, and it's just going to get worse with these goal changes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Uden, and I'm sorry about that mispronunciation. And I know these members of the board, including myself, will want staff to respond to your comments when that item comes up on the agenda item. So stay tuned, because I think we'll get some answers. Next speaker, please.
Madam Vice Chair, next up for public comment, Roland Lebrun.
Mr. Lebrun?
Thank you, Thank you, Madam Chair. If you look in the chat,
There's some background coming.
yes,
Okay.
I apologize. Let me see if I can get rid of this. Hang on.
Sound like you're a pilot flying.
I'm here. Okay, so I'm on another call. I sent you a link in the chat that points to the Fresno Trench. because we just had this discussion about acquiring all these right away from Union Pacific and BNSF, etc. I'd like to bring to your attention that some of these right of way, not all right of way is equal. So if you start looking from the bottom, you can see that they've already cut right through Highway 180. And now they're stuck. They actually have to cut through the Dry Creek Canal. And now, when the entire thing falls flat on its face, they're trying to cut the true Union Pacific lines. What these Union Pacific lines are actually the Y to the Central Valley line. That's a line that goes to Mendota. I wrote to the board last year how we could use that line to actually go to I-5 and eventually to Panoche Pass, because you got to be realistic. Pacheco will never ever happen. That you got to be realistic. The response I got from the chair, Mr. Richards, was thank you, Mr. LeBrun. The authority's response was to actually to delete the document that I had pointed to in my June letter in the programmatic EIR showing the problem. We're trying to link San Francisco to Sacramento via Gilroy and Merced. That's how we finished up with the San Jose to Merced EIR. So in closing, I really want you to revisit this, because the meetings I had with the authority in 2017, just before 2018 business plan, they made it very clear every train is going to stop in Fresno.
15 seconds remaining.
My question to you is, if every train is going to stop in Fresno, why do you need a 200-mile-an-hour trench just north of Fresno Station? Doesn't make any sense. If a train is not going to stop in Fresno and has to go through there at 200 miles an hour, what is that train doing in downtown Fresno? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeBrun. Next speaker, please.
Madam Vice Chair, next up for public comment, we have Brian Aguilar.
Mr. Aguilar,
Everybody, can you hear me okay?
we can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to speak to a prior bullet point that was made around the efforts of high-speed rail to engage students and to participate in the education of students and mentorship in all their efforts. I work with the Executive Fellows Program, and for several years now, high-speed rail has played a really strong, their team has played a really strong role in providing not only mentorship opportunities for our fellows, but providing greater resources to all of our students, grad students at Sac State, and have done some tremendous work in the Valley in expanding the inclusion of student voices and opportunities for growth and education as well. Both Brian Kelly and Melissa Figueroa have been adamant and really invested in this since they were an agency and through high-speed rail, and continue to do so as well. So I just wanted to make sure that the board here knew about their efforts and our continuing partnerships with them. They did an outstanding job of mentoring our young professionals and our future leaders in public service.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Aguilar. Appreciated. Next speaker.
Madam Vice Chair, we don't have anybody raising their hand. I'm going to briefly go over the instructions just to ensure if anybody joined afterwards, they can be able to provide public comment. Attendees who would like to provide public comment, please use the raise your hand feature, typically located at the bottom of your screen, so that I may call on you to provide your comment. Madam Vice Chair, I see we have next up for public comment, Alfonso Rodriguez.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Good morning. My name is Alfonso Rodriguez. That's ALFONSO-RODRIGUEZ. I'm the project director at the Transbay Joint Powers Authority, responsible for delivering the downtown rail extension project that will provide for the extension of Caltrain and California high-speed rail service to the Salesforce Transit Center into downtown San Francisco. In addition to high-speed rail and Caltrain, the multimodal 6-story Salesforce Transit Center will connect 9 regional bus systems and provide for a fully integrated transportation system to the mega region. As a member of our Transbay Joint Powers Authority board, the California High-Speed Rail Authority has been a strong partner as we work together towards realizing the vision of the Transbay program. Along with our other San Francisco Peninsula Rail Program partners, we are advancing the downtown rail extension project, and in the coming weeks, TJPA will request entry to the Federal New Starts Grants Program working to obtain our full funding grant agreement. We look forward to our continued partnership with the California High-Speed Rail Authority towards enhancing transit services for the Bay Area and the entire state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Appreciate your comments. And I encourage my fellow board members to go to the Salesforce Transit Center. It's amazing to see, visually amazing. Next speaker.
Madam Vice Chair, we have not had any new attendees join, so all attendees have been updated on the instructions to provide public comment, and none after Mr. Rodriguez has motioned to provide public comment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mo. Now we will go to agenda item number 2, unless I'm mistaken again. But first, I would like Brian Kelly to introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Members, this is all items on the agenda today are informational items for the board. We do not have a request for action on any items, and this is really because there's a good discussion to have on each of these things. The first one, though, is the first of 3 regional updates we'll be giving to the board over the course of the next 3 meetings. Today, Boris Lipkin, our Northern California Regional Director, will provide this update on where we are, where things are stand, and the work we're doing in the Bay Area. Coming before the board shortly are the opportunity to approve 2 new rods in spring of 22 that will include the stretch from Merced to San Jose and then San Jose to San Francisco. So it's timely for Boris to provide the board with an update on the activities in the Bay Area, Northern California. In November, I will come to the board with an update for this on the Central Valley, including a construction update, but a Central Valley update more broadly. And then in December, we will come to the board with a Southern California update as well. So I just wanted to tee this up by saying this is the first of 3 regional updates on activities in each region of the state that we have underway. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Boris. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Sure. Any questions of Brian before we go to Boris? Mr. Lipkin.
All right. Good morning, Vice Chair Miller and members of the board. As Brian mentioned, I'm Boris Lipkin, Northern California Regional Director. And as we pull the slides up, perhaps. Excellent. I appreciate the opportunity to give this update to the board. And let's just jump right in. Next slide, please. Just by means of background, to give you a sense of what we talk about when we talk about the Northern California region, is the roughly 135 miles of the system from San Francisco to Carlucci Road, which is where we meet the Central Valley Y. This area covers 5 counties, about 20 cities, and is part of course, the MTC 9-county Bay Area with about 7 million people. So a big geography and lots of different communities here. Just to give you a few snapshots of the different pieces of the system here, starting in the north, we have the Salesforce Transit Center, as has been talked about already, and I'll get into a little bit more. If you go to the next one, we have the Millbrae Station, which is one of our kind of key regional hubs and connections to the San Francisco Airport, BART, and Caltrain at that location. Keep going to the next one. We have in the Caltrain corridor, the blended system, and where we will share tracks with the Caltrain system, and that's sort of up and down a lot of that line. In San Jose, we have the Diridon Station work that I think Jessica Zank mentioned, where we have good partnerships there. And then as we continue to go through to the south, we have our Gilroy Station and a hub that will connect out to the coastal communities as well on the Monterey Peninsula. And then finally, the Pacheco Pass is our big mountain crossing to get from the Central Valley to the Bay Area, and we'll cover a little bit more about that as well. That's just a snapshot view, but as if we can go to the next slide, please. What I want to mention, and thank you. In Northern California, and I think this sort of mirrors the rest of how we've talked about implementing high-speed rail, is we have building blocks at sort of all stages of project development, and kind of starting on the right with completion. Again, we have the terminus in San Francisco is ready. It's already been built and in operations. We're involved with that. We have 51 miles of construction ongoing on the Caltrain electrification project. We're working closely with partners, as was mentioned, on the downtown extension, which will connect the existing rail corridor to the Salesforce Transit Center. And then, of course, I'll talk a lot about our environmental clearance work from San Francisco to Merced and the ongoing planning work in Diridon around that station. So again, there's lots of good partnerships across the region. I'll start there, and then I'll get into our work and what's upcoming for the board in terms of our 2 Northern California project sections on the environmental front. Next slide, please. Starting in San Francisco, the Salesforce Transit Center, as I mentioned, has already been built. As you can see on sort of the cut section on the graphic there, our trains will arrive 2 levels underground. That train box has already been completed, and the work now is about connecting that to the rest of the rail corridor. There's other levels in terms of certainly ground floor retail, the bus deck on the 3rd floor, and then the big highlight is the park on the rooftop of the transit center. Really world-class facility. We recently had an opportunity to do a tour and a Q&A video kind of streaming with folks to answer questions from the rooftop park, and that was certainly an exciting event. I think that the YouTube of that is available, and we can certainly share that with the board. And as Vice Chair Miller mentioned, if you have an opportunity to visit, this is certainly a landmark that's worth stopping by when you are in San Francisco.
Boris, it's
yes.
Lynn. Which one is street level? And I can't tell from the picture what is there.
Sure. So basically, if you're starting at the bottom, that's where the trains are. The next level up is the mezzanine for passenger access, and then the next level up is the street level. That's where some of the buses are, and that's where the Grand Hall is.
Okay. Wow.
And then just the only other point to make about San Francisco is our plans envision using the 4th and King station, which is the existing terminus of the Caltrain line, until the downtown extension is complete to bring rail service to the Salesforce Transit Center. Of course, if the rail tunnel is complete before we get there, then we'll happily use the transit center directly. Next slide, please. A few updates on other kind of what we call the bookend projects in Northern California. I think you have a letter from Caltrain focusing on the Caltrain electrification project, and this is certainly an exciting advancement of construction. That project is more than 50% complete. It's mostly finished the civil portion of the construction and moving on to the signal system integration components. The authority has been a close partner on that project, and we're contributing over $700 million, which is about 1/3 of the project cost, towards that project. Currently, the Caltrain is going through an additional review of their both budget and schedule, and they're currently expecting the project to complete in 2024, and we're of course working very closely with them on making sure that will be successful. The other project I wanted to mention was one that came up, I believe, in Brian's CO report last month. We finished the 25th Avenue grade separation project. This was a key grade separation, one of the most dangerous ones in the state. And for Northern California, this was our first completed bookend. So the grade crossings are open, and they actually rebuilt the Hillsdale station in San Mateo along with that. And so we had a chance to participate in the ribbon cutting along with Caltrain, San Mateo County, the city of San Mateo, and other key partners. That really does show how these projects take a little bit of a village to get done, but we're certainly happy to see that one open to the public and providing benefits immediately as we continue to move forward with bringing high-speed rail to the corridor. Next slide, please. Continuing to move south, I think you heard directly from Jessica Zink about our joint work with other partners at Diridon Station. I'm not going to get into too many details on this, but just to say is that at Diridon, we have kind of a complex set of things happening. For our system, we're of course, through our environmental clearance, looking at how do we add high-speed rail to the existing station, and that's been our focus. Through this joint planning work, of course, we're looking at a bigger vision that really looks at potentially rebuilding the entire station, and sort of driven by, us, of course, adding high-speed rail service. BART is also coming in. There's a giant Google development happening right next to the station. And so there's lots of work happening on coordinating all these different projects. And we're working on updating our cooperative agreement that speaks to all of this, as well as a potential memorandum of understanding with San Jose about how all these different pieces, including the city's push and plans for great separation projects further south of the station, can move forward together. And so we're certainly happy to have great partners here, and lots of ongoing work around what this facility will look like with high-speed rail, and of course with many other changes that are coming down the line. Next slide, please. And then finally, getting to Gilroy, this is what you see in the rendering on the right is something out of our flyover video. The pink building is the existing historic station. The rendering is simply massing of some of the high-speed rail station components that we might need there. But right now we're, when the board identified the preferred alternative for the San Jose to Merced project section, we were able to really start doing our station area planning work with the city of Gilroy about focusing on, of course, the station itself, but also surrounding land uses and the integration with the rest of Gilroy's downtown. And so we're continuing to work that out with the city. We're helping them apply for a grant currently. And of course, also thinking about the connections to with other things going on in that area. Next slide, please. So that's sort of the quick snapshot of the many partnership things that we have going on in Northern California that go kind of beyond just our work in the region. I did want to give a quick snapshot of our 2 Northern California project sections as well, which is really the work that the authority itself is leading. And so certainly there will be, as Brian mentioned, upcoming actions for the board to consider as we advance our work through the environmental clearance process. So starting with the San Francisco to San Jose project section, what we are studying here is the infrastructure that's needed on top of the Caltrain electrification, which will go a long way to providing high-speed rail service, but there are things that we need in this project section beyond that in order to provide high-speed rail service. And so lots of this is the same. We have 2 alternatives in this project section. They are similar in many respects in terms of improving safety of the corridor, increasing the speed up to 110 miles an hour. We have some modifications we need to make at the existing Millbrae station to provide service there. And those are common between the alternatives. The differences between the 2 alternatives include the location of the light maintenance facility on either the east or the west side of the rail corridor in Brisbane, with the preferred alternative being alternative A, which has it on the east. The question was whether we needed a passing track in the middle of the corridor. So we studied one between Redwood City and San Mateo, but the preferred alternative, we found that we could provide the service without that infrastructure, the levels that we're talking about here. And then the last part is the approach into Diridon Station and whether we could approach it at grade, which again, the preferred alternative does, or whether we would need a viaduct if we're coming in above the station there. So again, preferred alternative here is alternative A. But there are lots of common features, again, because it's an existing rail corridor that we need to upgrade. Next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of where we've been, as I mentioned, kind of a big milestone in both of these project sections was 2019, when we identified the preferred alternatives in both of these that the board helped us make those decisions. We issued our draft environmental documents in 2020, and then as things continue to evolve, we recirculated a limited recirculation of some materials focused on the Millbrae Station as well as the Monarch Butterfly in 2021. And we're now hard at work on finishing all the responses to comments. We did, I'll mention a little bit of the feedback that we got back and preparing the final environmental document that we expect to bring to the board in the second quarter of next year. Next slide, please. This is just a quick summary of the feedback that we received on the draft environmental documents. So we were, as I mentioned, out for comment the last 2 summers on different components of this. We had a total of about 150 submissions and 2,000 comments on the original draft environmental document, and about 24 submissions and 150 comments on the recirculated materials. So all of that is being carefully, we have to respond to every single one of those, and we're certainly doing the work to do that. And we're carefully considering any changes that need to be made in the final environmental document right now. Next slide, please. Just to highlight a couple of key issues and challenges in this project section. One is, as I mentioned, the Millbrae station is one of our key regional hubs. It's our connection to the San Francisco International Airport, BART, Caltrain, and Samtrans, and our only station in San Mateo County. Some of the challenges here are around planned and existing land uses on the west side of the station, and how our station can be integrated with development. We're certainly not looking to preclude any transit-oriented development on that side of the station, but we have had some challenges with some of the land use plans from the city there as well. The other one that I wanted to mention is the light maintenance facility. As folks can probably imagine, there are very limited options in terms of having a 100-acre site that we could use close to our terminal station in San Francisco. And so we've looked up and down the corridor for different options and landed on the locations in Brisbane. We identified the preferred alternative on the east side, in part because there is planned mixed use and housing development on the west side, so looking to avoid some of that. But the east side does have its own challenges in terms of being a former landfill site and other things that we're continuing to work through as we continue to look at those options and move some of that forward. Next slide, please. Moving to the San Jose to Merced project section. This is probably one of our most complicated sections in that it spans everything from sort of the 21 miles of San Jose, as you heard from our public comment, but also the communities in South Santa Clara County, in Morgan Hill and Gilroy, as well as some of our really major construction as we cross through the Pacheco Pass and out to the Central Valley. The alternatives in this project section, the preferred alternative is alternative 4. It's the purple line on the map. All the alternatives vary between San Jose and Gilroy before becoming one main option through the Pacheco Pass. The preferred alternative, its kind of key feature that's different than the other ones is while the other ones have what we call a dedicated system, so high-speed rail operating by itself all the way through San Jose before getting onto the Caltrain corridor. In alternative 4, we propose to extend the blended system down the existing rail line currently owned by Union Pacific to provide for both us and for Caltrain being able to run more service in a blended configuration all the way down to Gilroy. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of that as well. Next slide, please. Similar kind of railroad to rod graphic as we had in San Francisco to San Jose. Here we're a little bit further ahead. So we've actually completed the cooperating and responsible agency review at this stage. And really we're in the final touches of the final environmental document before bringing that to the board in the first quarter of next year. So this one will come first, and then San Francisco, San Jose will come second. Next slide, please. Similar recap when we our timelines kind of match very closely in terms of the time when we released both the original draft and the recirculated materials. Here it was focused on the change in species status around the mountain lion and monarch butterfly, as well as new information on noise and artificial lighting impacts to wildlife, is the parts that we recirculated earlier this year. But we got about 750 submissions and almost 5,000 comments. Now, some of those were a form letter that we will, if people give us the same comment, we'll give them the same response on the original draft, and then about 200 comments from 14 submissions on our recirculation earlier this summer. Next slide, please. Finally, I wanted just to give a snapshot. In this project section, we've had a specific and extensive focus on environmental justice. Given the geography of the existing rail line and where certain communities live, we found that there are substantial AJ communities in this project section. And so we've been working very closely with them since 2019, actually, on both identifying and understanding and evaluating our impacts, as well as potential mitigations, benefits, and community improvements that would be could potentially offset some of those effects. And so we have actually just completed our last round of outreach in support of the ROD, focused on those issues, as well as vetting some of our draft conclusions. And we're taking a close look at the feedback that we received, incorporating that, and we'll be looking to bring all of that analysis to the board as part of the final EIR EIS when we come to you next year. Next slide, please. Finally, highlighting kind of a couple key issues in this project section. One you heard a little bit about from, Jessica Zhang mentioned this, is that we're continuing to negotiate with Union Pacific for the right to use their corridor between San Jose and Gilroy. That is, of course, important for us in terms of reducing our impacts if we're using an existing rail corridor rather than building a new one. But of course, it also provides for electrified Caltrain service, potentially down to South San Jose and South Santa Clara County, which has been a long time goal for the county, the region, and Caltrain, and those communities as well. And so we have some really strong partnerships in pushing that, and lots of support to get that done. But of course, negotiating with Union Pacific always has its challenges. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is the path through Pacheco Pass and San Joaquin Valley.
Forrest, before you get
Yes.
there, please
Sorry.
I still can remember it.
Of course.
So on the electrification from San Jose to Gilroy, extends the blended system. Can you talk a little bit about how that would impact, that blended system would impact time and speed?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely looked at that. That was one of the key challenges. And when we looked at that, when we were developing the alternative and then looking at what should be the preferred alternative, just to give a sense, the maximum speed on that one is 110 miles an hour, similar to the rest of the blended system. The maximum speed it kind of varies, but it ranges between 150 to 180 on the dedicated alternatives between San Jose and Gilroy. So we looked at this very carefully, and this was about, I think it was 3 to 4 minutes of travel time that we gave up to extend that blended system. The analysis that we did was basically looking to make sure that we can continue to meet our 2 hour and 40-minute travel time between San Francisco and Los Angeles with those additional minutes. And we were able to do that. And so that's why we were able to take on this option that wasn't, there were other ideas thrown out there around highway medians and other things that we couldn't do, but this one was feasible under those travel time requirements.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was concerned about.
Yep. Great question. And I appreciate you have the long history on those questions. So it's always good to reconfirm some of those things. Going back to kind of Pacheco Pass, this is our, beyond the Central Valley, the really big construction. I think you heard about some of the tunnel sections in Bakersfield to Palmdale a couple of months ago. We have a 13.5-mile tunnel, which is Tunnel 2 through the Pacheco Pass, which is one of our major works in Northern California. This is our longest lead time item for the Valley to Valley line. And so we're certainly very eager to get to environmental clearance, as well as continue to advance design, the geotechnical and other investigations that we need to do in order to make sure that we know all the details of how that will be built and what it will take. As we get throughout the project section, there's also a number of sensitive wildlife areas that we're working very closely with a number of stakeholders on in Coyote Pass and Coyote Valley, which is between sort of Morgan Hill and San Jose, in the Pacheco Pass area, and of course in the Grasslands ecological area as we get into the into the San Joaquin Valley. So big construction, big projects, and lots of work to do on the dedicated stretches in Northern California. But of course, this is also how we get the big benefits, that making this connection is in these tunnel sections is critical for us to be able to provide the big benefits that we have, right? In terms of making the trip from Fresno to San Jose instead of, a 3 to 4 hour drive, which it is today, to about an hour on the train. And that really starts to transform California, but we need to get through these big mountains in order to do that. And then next slide, please. These are, I think I only have a couple, 2 or 3 slides left, but the other thing that I want to make sure to leave the board with is I've mentioned a lot of our partnerships, but also the strong support that we've had in the region. This is really, one example of that. And I think some of our partners actually mentioned this, is MTC, which is our metropolitan planning organization in Northern California. They are taking up their long-range plan, Plan Bay Area 2050. And one of the things that they've done in that plan is include up to $7 billion of investment to bring high-speed rail to the Bay Area and make other improvements. And so this is the first region in the state that's actually included regional discretionary funds for high-speed rail in their long-range plans. So we're happy to have such great partners in the region who see investment in the program as critical, not just for statewide objectives, but also for the region and its future. And so, of course, that provides us, opportunities to how we leverage any regional, state, and federal funding opportunities, especially around joint benefit projects like what I mentioned between Gilroy and San Jose, where it's not just high-speed rail benefit, but it's many others as well that would benefit from that kind of project. And so, this is certainly very exciting. That doesn't mean that we have $7 billion in the bank or anything like that, but it does mean that the region is really looking at this system as part of its long-range future as well. And then next slide, please. And again, just focusing on I think I would be remiss as the Northern California Regional Director if I didn't mention the strong support from many of our stakeholders in the recent conversations around our legislative and budget asks, as well as federal funding opportunities, who've really worked with us hand in glove on many of those. And this is our little train of supporters. You can see it's a variety of transit partners, labor, advocacy, business organizations, and many others who have been with us. And we're certainly very grateful for all the work that they've done. And these kinds of projects, it really does take a village, and we absolutely could not have gotten to the point where we are in Northern California, or move forward without many of these organizations who've really been with us through thick and thin on our work in the region. So want to again reiterate thank you, and make sure that the board was aware of that as well. And then I think I have just one more slide. This is just to give a sense of our kind of outreach and engagement plans in the next few months. Right now, we have a round of working group meetings that we're doing right now. We will do another round as in each project section as we release the final environmental documents. We'll also be engaging with stakeholders and some of the folks that commented on our documents to follow up with them before and as we release those. And we'll continue our regular stakeholder engagement. We have, legislative briefings. We have a monthly meeting with the local policymaker group, which has one elected council member from each of the cities along the Caltrain corridor, as well as others. We have a pretty robust outreach program that will be continuing as we get to next year, and then ultimately to bringing the environmental documents for your consideration in the first half of next year. And I think with that, that's my last slide. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Lipkin? Well, that just tells you what a nice presentation you made. So thank you, Boris, for that. Nice to see the Bay Area, particularly that 7 billion. That's over, what is that, 2030 to 50, or is that 22 to 50?
It's in their kind of 2035 to 50 part of their plan. But, you know, of course, part of the conversation that has been happening for a few years in the Bay Area is whether there would be a potential regional ballot measure focused on transportation investment. And we certainly want to be in those conversations and at the table if there are opportunities to bring some of that sooner and make that long-range plan into actual investment happening for the project as we move forward.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
All I can say is I wish we were having a plan like this for Southern California too, so that we will look forward to that.
Thank
Well, it's
you.
coming in what, November? Thanks. Go
thank
ahead.
you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Lynn. Those were my exact thoughts about having such a robust presentation for Southern California. Thank you.
Lynn, you took the words right out of my mouth. So
I knew that's where I found them.
Just to reiterate on that, again, this is the first of three. Central Valley will be in November, and we'll do the SoCal in December. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Nancy, I agree with
Yes.
you. A tour of the Transbay Terminal is well worth it. When the pandemic clears, I think maybe we should have a field trip to take in what they've done there.
Great idea, Jim.
Oh, that is a good idea, Jim. It's unbelievable.
I think folks would be excited to have you. And if even, you know, one of you happens to be in the area, I would be happy to personally give a bit of a tour if you're interested and join you up there.
Great, thanks.
Sounds great. Okay, with that, we go to our item number 3, which is our Bagley-Keene training.
Apologies, Madam Vice Chair, apologies for the interruption. It seems that Chairman Richards, due to technical difficulties, was dropped off the call. He has rejoined the call, but he still has limited capabilities just of audio.
Okay, thank you. So can we go to item number 3?
Absolutely. Good morning, Vice Chair Richards and Board. Alicia Fowler, your Chief Counsel. I have one of our attorneys with us, Kate Cook. We're here to present some training on the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, something we live with daily and or at least every month in these meetings. And we just want to make sure we're all conversant in it. I did want to give Kate a few minutes just to introduce herself, because I know not all the board members have had a chance to work with her yet.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. I'm very happy to be here. My name's Kate Cook. I work on the HSR legal team, which I'm very happy to be a part of as a native Californian and someone who's really excited about this project. Prior to that, I spent many years in private practice at law firms supporting primarily public clients, so city councils, county boards, special districts, that kind of thing. I served as city attorney, deputy city attorney, special counsel, district counsel, you name it. Lots of public meetings and even more public meetings in my prior life before law. I was a newspaper reporter covering cities, counties, districts, even university regents. So got lots of experience with all these open meetings laws, and I can tell you that the benefit of them and kind of seeing what the public and government can get done together when it's all functioning and the trust is there, it's pretty phenomenal. So I'm happy to.
Whoop.
Something happened, Kate, to your audio.
You want to try again, Kate?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. It was just reverberating.
Oh, well, I'm happy to be here to help you present. So let's get going.
Great, thanks. We move to the next slide. Thanks. So this is just an overview of what we're going to cover this training today. I know this is a refresher for most of you. You've been on our board for a long time. You've been on other boards and committees and commissions. But I think we all agree this is such an important area. We do have to follow it. questions come up, and it's just nice to have a refresher, talk through, and we certainly want this to be interactive to the extent anything we're presenting raises questions for you, or there's just questions you guys have. Please feel free to jump in. One of the things we're going to be covering, and it just want to be confusing, we're going to talk about the Bagley-Keene Act as it exists normally. And then we're going to also talk about how it has existed and will continue to exist for a few more months, sort of under the pandemic, sort of this Zoom world. And so we'll try to make sure we're being clear on any particular topic or slide, if it's sort of what we're under right now, under the pandemic rules, or if it is going to be back to the normal Bagley-Keene rules, which we expect right now to return in February of 22. If you can go to the next slide.
So as you all know, the purpose of the Bagley-Keene Act is basically to give the public a seat at the table. That's how we try to think of it. We need to make sure that your meetings as a state body are happening in an open forum to permit the public to be part of that conversation. And not just when you're taking actions, but actually when you're just even having discussions or deliberating things. It came about, I think it was the mid-60s, and it was a little later than the Brown Act, which happened in the 50s. The Brown Act got added to set up the laws for the local agencies. And about a decade later, they had a commission put together to say, hey, wait a minute, what about all the state bodies? We're not really sure which rules apply to them and which don't. And it was kind of interfering with things getting done. And the public wanted a seat at the table. And so now they clearly have that. And so we do our best to adhere to this every meeting and even outside the meetings, which we'll talk about in a minute.
We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So if we want to talk about who has to comply with Bagley-Keene, to Kate's point, these are rules over state bodies. So of course, our board as a state entity is complying with this. It's important to note any one of you at the point of your appointment to such a state body. So as the moment you're appointed as a board member, these rules begin to apply to you. It's not sort of at your first meeting, or it's really the minute someone gets appointed to a state body. So it's important to remember that. It also, besides applying to our entire board, it applies to committees or subcommittees formed by our group that's 3 or more persons. So a perfect example for that for this group is our F&A committee, our Finance and Audit Committee, which has for quite a while now been made up of either 3 or 4 board members over time. And because of that, and because it was a subcommittee formed by this board, it follows all the Bagley-Keene Act rules that we are following as a board. So that's a kind of a good example of times we have to comply. If we can move to the next slide.
So some of the basic requirements that I'm sure you're all aware of are notice requirements, agenda requirements for your regular meetings, which happen every month. We need to get that agenda out 10 days beforehand. If we were to have a special meeting, which you're only allowed to do on really particular topics, if there's an immediate need for something, that's a 2-day, a 48-hour requirement. And the agenda, the job of the agenda is to list the specific items that you'll be discussing or taking action on so that the public can take a look at it. And if they knew nothing about our project, could look at that agenda and make that decision whether they want to attend that meeting and make comments or just watch the meeting. We also are required to make materials available to the public that are part of the meeting, including things that get passed out at the meeting. And we also, even during COVID times, as you know, we are doing, need to make sure we have a placeholder on the agenda for the public to give its comment on anything that's on the agenda before you all discuss it. Next slide.
So basic requirements, this slide is really maybe more aligned with Bagley-Keene outside of the pandemic. And for example, having to make sure our location where we are meeting is ADA compliant physically. When someone enters the room to address the board or just participate, they are welcome to write, John Doe on a list of, entries. They don't have to give a full name. And they are welcome to have any kind of recording device during meetings, as long as, you can imagine it's not something that's making a lot of noise and causing disruption of a meeting. Next slide. So this, topic is really what is a meeting of this group? And this one, pretty obvious for most meetings. It's when we get together to sort of talk about the project, our project, our jurisdiction, and make decisions. It includes these regular meetings that we attend almost every month. As Kate mentioned, there could be reasons for a special or even an emergency meeting that is defined in the Act that we would be able to pull together much more quickly than these normally monthly noticed meetings. And for this board, and based on our side and our statute, a quorum of 5 voting members is required for us to actually transact business as at one of our authority meetings. Again, not a subcommittee meeting, which is a smaller group, can have a different number, but for the full board to meet, we need 5 voting members, or for the full board to transact business. Next slide.
So continuing on the topic of what is a meeting, because Bagley-Keene requires that all of your meetings, unless there's a special exception, be open in public. So we want to make sure we're not accidentally having a meeting. And this is a really important area, serial meetings. It comes up a lot. This is an area where there's always questions because it's easy to get caught up in a conversation and perhaps violate Bagley-Keene when one isn't intending to. So a serial meeting is something that the Act prohibits, and it's basically a series of communications where there might be 1 board member or 2, less than a quorum, but through this series of communications with other board members, either directly or through an intermediary, say a lawmaker or a lobbyist or a member of the public or staff, there becomes a quorum in that discussion. And it doesn't have to require that action be taken. This can just be a conversation about something that high-speed rail has under its jurisdiction that you all as a board have jurisdiction over. So there's 2 main ways that serial meetings happen. There's the daisy chain and the hub and spoke. Next slide. This is an example of the daisy chain where board member A talks to board member B talks to board member C, and you see where this is going. And this could be via text messages or phone calls or a grocery store conversation. And by the end of it, 5 of you have kind of had a conversation about something under your jurisdiction. And that would be a serial meeting in violation of the Act.
What if it were less than 5?
If it's less than 5, it's not a violation. It requires the majority of you have the conversation. The danger though becomes, I think, the more of you that are participating in that, there's a greater chance to have a violation by, say, if 4 of you are on a text chain, it only takes 1 of you to then communicate about that text chain to a 5th one for there to be a quote meeting that happened. So it can be less than, there's nothing wrong with less than a quorum of you talking.
Okay. All right. So in this example 1,
Yes.
I added up right, it's less than 5. So it would be permissible.
This would be permissible. If there was a board member E and board member F, then it would not be permissible if the chain kept going.
What, excuse me, Kate.
Yes.
What happens if we communicate with a staff person and that staff person is talking to 5 or more board members?
Excellent question. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Well, before you do that, Kate, what about if This only applies to issues that have been agendized, correct?
That's a common question, and board member Scuccia, it actually applies to anything that's under your subject matter jurisdiction.
Okay, all right,
And
that's fair.
yeah, and so there's actually a recent Attorney General opinion that touches this exact question. So you're not the only one asking this question right now. Last year, an Attorney General opinion came out. The FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission, submitted a request to the Attorney General to ask, hey, what if 5 of us and the majority of us have lunch just to talk about whether or not Bagley-Keene applies to us or how Bagley-Keene applies to us? It's not on our agenda. We just want to talk about it. We just want to have lunch. The Attorney General came back and said, that's a violation. Bagley-Keene and how that applies to your board, even if it's not on an upcoming agenda, that's still under your subject matter jurisdiction. It's still something the public might want to be a part of. So please don't do that. That would be a meeting that you have to put out an agenda for. So it applies to anything that could come up on your agenda in the future, even if it's not slated to in the near future.
So for example 2, that's what your slide you have right now. In example 2, you indicate that staff communicates individually with each board member in advance of a noticed or agendized meeting. But what about if staff communicates with us on issues that are not noticed or agendized? Is that still permissible?
So both of those examples are completely permissible. So this is the hub and spoke model. And so let's say CEO Kelly is in the center of that wheel, and around the wheel are the board members. CEO Kelly can have individual conversations with board members, with 2 board members, with 3, even 4, giving a kind of one, information on upcoming agendas or stuff that's going on at the authority. Then he can have a different meeting with a different board member. As long as it's not a majority at one time, that's okay. And as long as he doesn't then communicate the opinions of some of you to other board members, it's okay. So he can't act as sort of an intermediary. He can act as, a one-way, here's the update, happy to answer questions, but I can't tell you what board member Camacho commented to me on this about, or I cannot share what, board member Shank thinks about this item. That's for the meeting. That's for your discussion. Does that clarify that?
What if our CEO or our CFO or any one of our staff communicates with one of us and only expresses that opinion to one other board member?
The act actually has language in there that suggests that the staff member who's having these individual conversations is not permitted to be sharing the opinions of other board members.
So this is in the statute?
It's in the statute, yes.
Okay, thanks, Kate.
Sure. So this is okay, like we just talked about, so long as the staff members not passing along the opinions of others, and we're not creating a meeting by accident, a serial meeting. And this can also happen, email, texting. I even had a situation with a local agency where a very heated debate was happening, and electeds were commenting on a newspaper article in the comments section. And I had to sort of jump in and give the friendly reminder of, hey, it looks like 3 of you are having a discussion about something in your jurisdiction, under your jurisdiction. Please, be careful. It's not a great idea for a majority of you to be commenting in the comments section. Someone could call that a meeting. We want to save that discussion for the board meeting when the public's invited and they can have a seat at the table as well in a noticed way.
Hey, or Alicia, this is Brian. May I ask a clarifying question here?
Sure.
Taking the example of a press story, for example, as the example, if I want to forward that as a subject of information to all the board members, I believe it's permissible, but I want to let you guys tell me that I could say, this is a story that has come up. I cannot, I don't want to then have a all-party conversation about it, but I can inform the board that here's a piece of information that you should all see and be aware of. And I can make that communication to the entirety of the board. But what's important is we're not having then a back and forth about that. Can you just clarify that that's permissible under this?
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to do, but we also want to stop any communication, back and forth amongst the board, because it's not hard to suddenly have a bunch of people commenting in an email and we've started a conversation that we ought not, but sending of information is perfectly okay.
Thank you.
Exactly. And on that,
So that brings up a question here. So Brian or Alicia or somebody sends out an update on a legal matter or a newspaper or whatever, and then we should not press reply all to respond, right? We should just respond directly to the person who's sending it. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct, Board Member Shank. And on our end, we should make it impossible for you to reply all, and we do our best so that you can only respond back to the staff member sharing information.
Yeah, but as you know, that has been a challenge, and
but yeah, you are exactly right. That is the approach. Communication, just respond back just to the sender.
What I think is really helpful is if you, when you send that out, Brian, or whoever staff member is to remind the board of that each time an email is sent, because it's really easy to forget that.
Yeah, that's something we labor to do, but I agree that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, we're all in the habit of reply all. It's so easy to hit that button. That Attorney General opinion that I talked about regarding the FPPC Commission actually talked about reply alls as well, because that was a separate question. And they did say in the opinion, it's okay to reply to one or to the sender, but it's not okay to reply all. That would be a meeting. So
what happens if we do that by accident? Do we then self-report our violation?
You're going to jail, Ernie.
It sounds like it.
Well, we'll get to
I'm now afraid to talk about the weather. And I thought we were talking about the weather earlier, that it was not raining here in Southern California. And I know I'm counting how many people I spoke to about that.
Well, I think the rule is if it's within our subject matter. So the weather is not really a high-speed rail thing.
Well, it does as it relates to construction.
There you go.
That's pretty attenuated, though.
Well, that impacts the amount of construction we do.
Hi, this is Martha Scutia again, and please forgive my questions because I'm still trying to figure out the hard rules, the bumper rails for our activities here. So my question again to council is, in situations involving matters within the jurisdiction of the authority, or in situations involving matters that have been agendized, in those two situations, and by the way, matters that are within our jurisdiction may not necessarily be agendized. In those situations, we're subject to we are subject to Bagley-Keene issues. Yes or no?
yes, definitely.
Okay, so in a situation where staff communicates, going back to example 2, in a situation where staff communicates individually with every board member, and by individually, I mean, maybe 7, 8, or 9 board members over a subject matter that's in our jurisdiction, not necessarily agendized, but it's a subject matter in our jurisdiction. Is that communication permissible?
That communication is permissible. There's specific language in the act that permits staff to have individual meetings with board members to answer questions, to give information, so long as there's not a majority of you involved in that meeting. And so long
so even though the staff member calls up everybody individually, that's not considered a serial meeting?
It's not a serial meeting unless the staff member is passing from board member to board member everyone
Information.
else's opinions. So
Right,
if the staff
okay.
member, the statute's very clear. I can send you the section if you'd like. And it allows for that because it knows, I think, it's set up for, you know, not to completely hamper business and not to completely hamstring you all to gather information from the people who have it.
Okay. I think I got it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in this example, the chair, Chair Richards, is directing a few of you to do a site visit, or perhaps it's the Salesforce field trip that we're talking about today. This is allowed under the Bagley-Keene, so long as a majority of you are not going. If a majority of you want to go on this site visit on the same day, that's also permissible under Bagley-Keene. We would just need to agendize it and let the public know that at this day and time, there's going to be a board meeting at this site visit. I've actually agendized in the past bus tours for city councils where they're doing like property tours or development tours of certain areas, and they all want to be on the same bus. And because all of them wanted to be in the same vehicle, we had to have room for the public, make sure it was accessible, and notice the meeting. And some public did attend. So we want to make sure we don't count the public out when a majority of you is meeting to talk about an agency business. The weather is totally fine to talk about. Next slide.
Oh, but Kate, can we go back to?
Oh, sure.
The idea of this slide, this example, which is the smaller group reporting back.
Yes, just a few of you go on a site visit to report back. That's not a meeting. There's less than a majority of you. It's not a standing committee or commission or anything like that. So that is permissible under Bagley-Keene to go do the site visit and then come report back.
And now next slide.
Okay, next slide.
But a site visit with a majority, but no report? And no discussion during the site visit?
Agenda.
Well, I think a site visit in and of itself is kind of something within your agency business. It's of interest to the agency. And so if a majority of you go at the same time, we would want to make sure we agendize that as a meeting. It's easy to, you know, not have to worry about that if you go in groups of 3 or 4 or something like that. But the public probably would just want notice if a majority of you are going to go visit Salesforce. And, you know, I think it's natural in those site visits to have a conversation about high-speed rail work or connections or future plans. So just to be
would the public have to be invited to join?
If there's a majority of you meeting in one place to consider anything or even have a discussion on possible high-speed rail, you know, business items, then the public would need notice and be able to join. If there's no actual business on the agenda, except for the site visit, it's going to be, you know, pretty limited involvement. But I have attended those too that have been noticed, and it's just kind of an open conversation basically that the public gets to observe.
Yeah. Well, it makes it harder on staff, but
it does. So those site visits are, that's why in that example, it's, you know, 2 folks going out to do a site visit, or groups less than majority. If you're just simply going with 2 or 3 of you at a time, then that's not a problem. That's not a meeting. There's no need for an agenda on that.
Brian, did you want to jump in on that?
Oh, I was just look, I'm trying to be, I know we got an agenda we got to move through, but I just to try to be helpful, you know, I've seen and experienced in the past working with other boards and commissions in my time, is if there's something like a site visit with all board members, I've seen, for example, staff of that entity then, you know, creating an event during that site visit that is sort of a meeting to discuss the policies around that. So in other words, members can go look at the site, see the site, and then we have an opportunity for a conversation about what they saw, what's there, and there's an opportunity for public to participate in that meeting element. So you can just make it a little of a bigger day. You're right, it's a little bit more on staff, but it's a way to make sure you can accommodate all the requirements Bagley-Keene. So that's all.
Nancy, let me add, when I was on the CTC, we used to have dinners after our regular scheduled meetings, and they were all agendized, they were all published. I don't know, maybe one or two people in all the years I was on, public persons ever attended the dinner, but those were perfectly legitimate to have as long as they were agendized.
Well, and I think the other way of saying that is we used to have, of course, it wasn't a majority, although maybe in a couple cases, and we just said we would only talk about the weather. We would not talk about anything under our subject matter jurisdiction.
Right.
Right. Which kind of.
You're safer to agendize it.
I think you're right. I think
Yeah.
you're right, Jim.
Then
Yeah.
it's got even a tour, agendize the tour, you'll find out that hardly anyone shows up.
Well, that was in the old days, Jim, with what goes on now, and the mood, I would say, of people. Well, anyway, it just, we'll deal with it when the time comes.
Lynn, the old days were a couple of years ago when I was on the
That's
CTC,
right.
all right?
Yep. No, that's true. And a lot has changed in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Do we require masks? Do we require vaccination? Do we, it's just a whole new world. So I think we ought to keep it under the majority.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what is a meeting under Bagley-Keene. There are things that are not meetings. Social gatherings would be one you guys have been touching on. And maybe to Nancy's point, it's fine for a majority of you to have a meal together as long as you are not talking about any authority business. Or attend a retirement party. That comes up often where, you all want to come and support someone, but just always be careful. If you want to attend conferences that are open and, public can attend and you could all go, or many of you could go, that's not going to be a problem. Or if other organizations have big public meetings that you attend, not an issue. Or if another local body, a state body is, has an event publicly that you guys are interested in. The one thing I'll note on this, maybe the second to last bullet here is, if there are open to notice meetings of a committee, you're all welcome to attend, but we call it the church mouse rule, where you can attend and observe, but not comment on things. And I'll use the perfect example as our F&A committee. We have certain members of our board that are on that committee that attend and speak and hear from staff and make decisions. It's fine for the whole board to attend and listen, but they aren't meant to join in and speak. And we actually have a board policy. This board has its own policy language that matches what Bagley-Keene requires and says that other board members can only attend these committee meetings as observers. So we definitely comply with that rule. And that way we aren't creating a super meeting at one of our small committee meetings.
Alicia, I, as a member of the F&A committee, I don't think we make any decisions other than ratify the past board meeting, the minutes of the prior meeting. I don't think that we make any decisions.
Okay, that's a good clarification, Board Member Camacho. Thank you. And if we can go on to the next slide. Back into what we can do at meetings. And again, this slide is going to talk about before the pandemic and then after the pandemic. So as far as we know right now, starting in February, we were always allowed to attend these meetings as board members in a teleconference manner or by phone. The biggest difference was if wherever you were as a board member attending this public meeting, you had to make that location accessible to the public. We had to post an agenda at the location that you were. And that has been sort of the thing that's been different during COVID for, I think, a lot of very good reasons. But I think everybody should plan until we hear differently that starting in February of 22, board members will either be together in some kind of public setting, or if your plan is to attend by teleconference, by Zoom, plan to do it from somewhere that you don't mind us putting that location on our agenda, and you don't mind, and then you're able to sort of post something and welcome the public into your office, your conference room, wherever that ends up being. And then wherever board members are in this Zoom world, if in fact the public did join them, they would have to be allowed to give public comment from that location as well as any of our other locations.
I don't know if any of you were on the board when Tom Umberg was on, and he was deployed to Afghanistan, and he literally called in from Afghanistan, and we had posted, where the public could go and comment. I don't think he ever had a member of the public comment.
Yeah, I think that's right, but at least the rules were all followed, and that's kind
Right.
of we're just going to have to get used to that again. And I think as we're going to talk later in the meeting about the schedule for board meetings, the rest for next year, I just want you all to take into account, you're going to have to be somewhere for those board meeting dates that you can either join us or you can be somewhere public or where public can attend. But if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about these rules we've been living under in the last few months or years.
So now we get to our current situation with COVID and open meetings. This is a chunk of language from Assembly Bill 361, which was signed into law last month. You can go ahead to the next slide. And basically what AB 361 does, as you all are likely aware, but just a refresher, it sort of extends the governor's executive order that allowed us to suspend certain provisions of Bagley-Keene and also the Brown Act and other open meetings laws that apply to public bodies. We still have to comply with all the noticing and agenda requirements. We still have to comply with those serial meeting requirements we had that robust discussion on. And we need to remember too that it's not just about whether decisions are made. There 15, 20, probably more than 20 years ago now, there used to be a concept in the courts they called collective concurrence. A court case came out on, oh, well, there was no collective concurrence, so it was okay that everyone met. The legislature was quick to shoot that down and revise the laws to say, we don't care if a decision's made, it's really about if there's even a discussion. We want the public at the table too. So we still have to comply with all the notice and agenda requirements to make sure the public can be at the table. It's just looking a little different now. We don't have to have a physical location where the public can attend, but we do need to make sure that the public can call in or Zoom in or however they're doing it, and that the way they do that is very clear, and that we can quickly resolve any concerns or accommodations that individuals with disabilities would need. We've been making adjustments along the way to do that. And AB 361 also says that the agency needs to basically use reasonable, methods to maximize transparency and maximize public access. But it is only in effect until January 31st of 2022. So we're all anticipating that after that date, as Alicia alluded to, after that date, it'll be back to the old teleconference rules. No more meeting from your car. So we'll have to get back to the standard rules and make everything accessible and have the notices posted and all of that. Are there any questions on the COVID sort of suspensions? Okay, we can go ahead and move on.
Okay, so closed sessions. We've talked a lot about everything we need to do in our normal board meetings and ensuring the public has access. There are some very narrow areas we are allowed to meet as a board without the public. Truly very narrow. We need to agendize the fact that we're going to go into a closed session and why. As we head out, and you've seen us do this at the end of an open meeting normally, but we can do it at any time. We need to announce to the public that we are going into a closed session and what it's about. And then at the end of that closed session, we need to return to the open session, or at least board chair, returns to make sure the public knows whether an action was taken, and any, if anything was done during that closed session that needs to be reported under the Act. And during that closed session, the board can only discuss this narrow type of agenda item that is allowed to be talked about in closed session. That's super important. The other thing that's very important is the confidentiality. The Act allows for this, for very specific reasons, and to the extent we violate that confidentiality by, for example, sharing out with others that aren't involved the information, we could be waiving a kind of a critical attorney-client privilege that could really harm the authority in a situation, following up where, if we shared that information out, it's obviously not privileged and it needs to be shared with others. And so we would just really stress how important it is that we stay on these narrow topics when we're in closed session, and then that we keep them confidential. If we can go to the next slide, we can talk about what some of those narrow areas are. The list in the Bagley-Keene Act goes on, but the ones we've captured here, these 4 are the ones that really could ever possibly apply to us. Hopefully never the 4th one. But talking about personnel matters, talking about litigation, pending, or that we are facing exposure to, or we are contemplating bringing. Particular real estate transactions can be discussed in closed session. And then, as I said, I hope we never have a criminal or terrorist threat to our property or data, but of course that would be a possible reason. And all of these are exempted from public comment or being involved in the public for reasons that there are times when the board needs to be able to make decisions and take actions that need to be done in private. And those are as I said, very short list that we are allowed to do that. And part of that is we keep a very small group in any closed session. The members, of course, counsel, any necessary staff sort of needed as the experts that can help on the issue. If it's a real estate issue, again, we might have the real estate negotiator able to share with the board the issues under discussion. And then that's it. Our goal is to, again, keep it very small. Next slide.
So one of the board members, I forget, it might have been board member Camacho earlier, asked about what are some of the penalties for violating Bagley-Keene. Some critics of the law, some, public access advocates, I would say, have criticized the law that it doesn't have enough teeth. There are misdemeanor criminal penalties in the law, but where an individual board member can be, found in violation. But I don't think there's ever been a case where that's actually been applied at the local or the state level. It's a pretty strict standard. You have to have the intent to violate the law and go into the meeting knowing you're doing so. So it's a pretty high standard. But, the risks, I would say, in terms of you might have to sort of have a do-over or cure your action, and that can have impacts. Just having something tied up legally can just be a risk in itself, of not following the act. And then legal fees, if if the agency is found to have violated the act, that could be responsible for the other party's legal fees. So there are definite, in addition to public trust and transparency, other motivating factors to make sure we're complying whenever we can. And the court can also, I've seen this happen at a local level, if there is a claim, a meritorious claim of that closed session is not going how it should, the court can step in and basically order that a body record its closed sessions and then monitor those in camera, away from the public. It's very rare, but it can happen. So we want to make sure in closed session we're sticking to the topic and keeping all that confidential. I don't think we've ever been at risk of anything like that, but you just want to make sure that there's never even a question that your board is following all the rules. Okay, next slide. And this is kind of a comparison to the Brown Act, which Bagley-Keene was modeled after. Brown Act, there's a little less time to get things out on the agenda. It also has really specific language in there about closed sessions that are sort of a safe harbor for the agency to use on the agenda. We don't have that luxury that we always make sure with closed session we give as many details as we should be giving. And next slide. I think that might be it.
Any other questions? This has been really wonderfully interactive, but if anything else that didn't come up has been on your mind, we'd happily answer.
And let me just say, we're running way over on our time here. So if you have a really important question, go ahead and ask it. But if not, I'm sure Alicia and Kate are available
Always, yes.
to talk after.
Thank you, Nancy.
So hearing no more question, thank you so much for the training. That was very informative. And we'll move to agenda item number 4, the strategic communication update.
Thank you, Vice Chair Miller, and hello to members of the board. My name is Melissa Figueroa. I'm the Chief of Communications for the Authority. I will be rapid in my presentation for the sake of time. I know we've all been sitting here quite a bit. If we can, there we go. We can just start with the first slide. So by way of background, I took over my position here at the Authority about 2 years ago as an appointee of the governor. When I started, we established some clear goals within our unit, which you'll see there on your screen. Overall, we are working to be far more proactive versus reactive in our approach with both the press and with our stakeholder community. We feel that that's the best way to get our message out quickly and accurately. So we're really making a very diligent effort to do that, to dispel any myths quickly, to correct inaccuracies in the press and with our stakeholders, and to make sure folks are prepared with the right talking points as appropriate. We're also making a very strong effort to diversify our outreach and media, and that's something that's a very personal thing for me as the head of this particular unit within our organization. My parents are both immigrants, and I think it's important that a project that is 500 miles long that touches a variety of communities up and down our state is speaking to the public in ways that resonate with them. So we are really working hard to make sure that we're doing that effectively. Go to the next slide. The communications team is broken up into 3 distinct units and branches. The communications branch oversees our traditional day-to-day media. That's rapid response, press releases, corrections to press articles, interacting one-on-one with reporters, video news releases, things of that nature. We also are in charge of the publications unit, which is our newsletters that go out quarterly, fact sheets that you see on our website, and a lot of the maintenance of our website. The Public Records Act unit, which is a strong way to say unit. It's 2 very talented individuals that work on all of that. So far to date, we've gotten more than 220 Public Records Act requests this year alone. So they work very hard in that area. And then of course, our digital media, which we'll elaborate on a little bit further. Next slide, please. So over the last 12 to 18 months, we have been able to use the momentum from the Biden administration to really emphasize our points that we are endeavoring to do here in California with building an electrified high-speed rail system. Of course, clean, green rail and transit is something that's very important to this administration. It's nice to be in a place where we are an example of how that's being done and have other partners nationally that are looking to us to learn more. So we're working closely with media, both at the state level, the national level, and then international as well, to convey what we're doing here in California. We have been fortunate to work on a number of pieces that have gotten a fair amount of attention over the last year with MSNBC, CNN Business, Reuters, Associated Press, New York Times, Los Angeles Times Chronicle, etc. And we're also doing a tremendous amount of work with our Spanish language media as well. We have a public information officer that was hired in our Sacramento office, and she is a dedicated bilingual public information officer. She also does a fair amount of English language media, but she is certified through the state to do bilingual Spanish language media. If we want to go to the next slide. So part of, I think, in my perspective, the best way to convey what we're doing is to take people out and show them. Of course, it's easy to get the folks that are already in the Valley to do that. It's a little bit more of a challenge to get media from other parts of the state and other parts of the country, though we have been successful in that. It's one of the most fun things I think we do in our world is to take people out and get them on these structures and meet with the workers and the small businesses and economic development partners around the Central Valley region that are touched by our project. So we have had a number of opportunities to do that over the last 2 years that I've been here, including with Governor Newsom, Senator Padilla, Congressman Costa, and a number of media outlets as well, including MSNBC, Tokyo TV, etc. Go to the next slide. Part of our work is not only internal communications and external communications and through newsletters. So we at our staff have a great amount of talent in writing, so we like to capitalize on that. We put out 4 quarterly regional newsletters. That's Northern California and Southern California. There's about 18,000 subscribers on those. Those often turn into media stories on social media and then traditional media as well. We also have a small business newsletter that goes out 4 times a year as well. And there's a little bit under 40,000 subscribers that go to that. We put out construction updates 3 times a year, spring, summer, and fall, which is when we're under the most active construction, as you well know. That always is accompanied by a video with our talented multimedia team putting that together in coordination with our folks in the Valley. So we'll have one of those coming out again next month. And then internally, we always put out information to our own staff. I think that the best way to communicate what you're doing is to make sure your staff is involved and informed. They are your first line of defense in terms of information. So we put out a newsletter internally about 6 times a year to all of our staff and the consultants that work on our project. Next slide. So digital media is one of the primary ways to get a message out quickly and effectively and using your voice. It generates buzz at an amazing rate of speed, whether good or bad. So it can have a double edge there, but we like to use it for good. So we have really increased our efforts in digital media, and we have done a number of trainings, research, and our staff is very, very excited to up our use on social media platforms. We post on pretty much everything except for TikTok right now. And this slide here talks about impressions. So the impressions are the number of times that our content has been displayed to users. So if you're on any of these platforms, this is the number of times it'll pop up on your screen. And pretty much across the board, we have increased the amount of impressions over the course of the last year. Next slide, please. So engagements, this is the back and forth dialogue. I think this is an important thing to note. When we put something up on social media, for us, it's important to engage with our audience. We don't just like to put something up and let it sit out there without a response. If we get questions from the public that are necessary to answer, we are trying to do that as quickly as possible. Our staff is always monitoring social media. We have dedicated staff that this is their primary focus, but most of our public information officers and even our regional directors are always flagging things that are worth comment. So we like to engage with the folks that are asking questions. We also engage frequently with our transit and rail partners, with members of the legislature, members of Congress. It is a fun way to go back and forth. And I think you might hear a little bit later from CEO Kelly on some engagement that we've had after some remarks last night from the president on high-speed rail. Next slide. So this shows you how much our audience has grown. Again, this is something that I really, when I came on board, I felt was necessary for us to take a more active approach. So I think that is showing here the number of followers that we have increased our reach by. So this just gives you a small idea on what we have done in terms of audience growth. Of course, different platforms merit different messages and different content. So we are deliberate and very strategic about what we are putting on each platform. LinkedIn has been a tremendous asset for us in terms of advertising not only our job opportunities, but job opportunities that are available through our partners. For our young students that you heard a little bit during public comment, we have a good outreach effort for students that we'll talk a little bit about in just a moment. Next slide. So YouTube, I'm sure you've all seen and heard about YouTube. So this is how we are getting out all of our videos. And we are fortunate to have a FAA certified pilot that has drone flying abilities, as you can see there. So we got a drone for our unit last year, and we're making really good use of that. This is a huge project, and the best way to see that from our perspective is from the sky. These are miles long construction sites. It's hard to get that in just a still photograph, so we're really making use of video. We are also translating a number of our videos into Spanish. So we have a Spanish YouTube page as well that's getting a good amount of traction, and it's been successful when we're trying to do outreach with our Spanish language stakeholders and media. If we want to go to the next slide. So the second branch is our external affairs branch. This is where we do a tremendous amount of work with, I would say, a fairly small staff. So we're in constant coordination with our regional directors, deputy regional directors, and outreach staff, as well as our director of external affairs here in Sacramento, Alice Rodriguez. And we do stakeholder coordination at the national level, international level, and then at the local level as well. This includes community engagement like tabling events. We're doing some night markets in the Fresno region, public meetings, of course, national coordination with our stakeholder partners, especially around all of the efforts going on at the federal level for legislation to make sure that they have the appropriate data points on our project. And international coordination. We speak in international conferences and collaborate on ideas and coordinate with our international partners as well. We want to go to the next slide. So we used the COVID pandemic, and we really thought hard about how we could still continue our outreach, even given the limitations of what we were able to do in person. And we were able to use Zoom and platforms like Zoom to our advantage. And we have upped the amount of engagement with the public via things like webinars. So in 2020, we did a total of 7 webinars, including with the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association and former Secretaries LaHood and Mineta and CEO Kelly. We've done jobs and hiring webinars with our labor partners, station planning webinars with our regional partners. We did a I Will Ride webinar with Vice Chair Miller. And we continue to do that to this day. So in 2021, we've done 5 so far, and we will continue setting those up. There's another one, a few coming up with Spur that we've been working on in Northern California that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Of course, we do presentations with organizations like Mobility 21 and Move LA and Transform, and we have a good time with those and bring in our experts in the authority and then our experts outside as well to collaborate on ideas. Next slide. I won't go too much into this. I think Boris talked about this a great deal in his presentation, but community outreach is one of the biggest things we do as we're trying to get these environmental documents complete. So this gives you a small idea on how much our engagement was for community outreach over the course of 2020. Next slide. Also in 2020, we relaunched our I Will Ride effort. Some of you are familiar with this. Previously, it was a regional sort of as needed based on each university's interest effort. We brought on a full-time staff member, Jacqueline Castro, who oversees our student engagement and outreach effort. And this has been something that she has really spearheaded along with Augie Blancas in our Central Valley office. And we are really proud of the work that we're doing to engage students up and down the state. If we want to go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about it there. So this, we love to do student tours. Of course, it's a little harder right now. We look forward to doing more of those as COVID allows us to. We're doing an outdoor engagement effort, as you heard Dr. Adams talk about earlier during public comment tomorrow with Fresno City College. Our students are so important to what we do, and we love to engage and inform them. And for me personally, the reason that this is just something that I take so seriously is because I started my career in television news, and then I made the transition to politics and communications for government. And had it not been for my mentors, I don't know that I would be in the position that I'm at now. And I want to make sure that we pay that forward. And I pay that forward for students who are considering careers and various things, and folks that are changing careers, and giving them an opportunity to have someone to ask those questions and to have them be taken under their wing to learn the ropes so that they feel comfortable in the positions that they're in. So we're very proud of our work with students in colleges around the state, and really, they're the best voice for what we're doing because they're so engaged and so vocal and creative, and we just love to harness their talent. And a number of them end up either working here in our offices or on our construction sites as well. So that's kind of exciting. Next slide. This is just a small group of the organizations that we have partnered with over the last year. We are proud partners of the Kids Discovery Museum. That's a children's museum in Merced that is just opening. We will have an outdoor exhibit dedicated to high-speed rail. We're one of their founding partners. We have a group of students doing a capstone project currently through USC, working with Jamie Metalka and our risk management. We have a Civic Sparks Fellow, that's an AmeriCorps program that's working in the Central Valley doing station planning, outreach, and engagement. Of course, you heard a little bit about the Capital Fellows program. We've had 2 Capital Fellows that have worked here over the last 2 years that I've been here. Jacqueline is one, Max Thogmartin is the other. We were fortunate to be able to hire both of them after their fellowship year ended. They're just very talented young students and just love their ideas. Next slide. So in 2020, we did 17 events for the I Will Ride program. In 2021, so far, we've done 23. So really ramping up our efforts to get information out there to the students and to offer them opportunities and hear from the experts. And that includes not only my staff, but our environmental team, our CEO, our CFO. Pam Mizukami has given presentations on how to get hired in the state. So we're doing everything we can to make sure we're educating and informing young students. Next slide. The third branch of our unit is, of course, one that you're well familiar with. This is our special projects branch. They're the ones tasked with writing the business plan, the project update report, the sustainability report. They also do a fair amount of work for grants coordination with our legislative unit. They are a small team and constantly writing and very diligent in their efforts and research. And we love working with them, and our team often leans in and helps with some of that effort as well, because it's a lot of work to put together those documents. So that gives a small summary of our unit, and I'm always happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you for that presentation.
I have just a quick comment in the interest of time. I have a lot to say about this area, but I'll keep it. Here in Southern California, and I mean real Southern California, San Diego, second largest city in California, there doesn't seem to be a lot of outreach. And I would urge you to consider a higher level of outreach here, not only because we are the second largest city, but we have some legislators who are quite important to us. Tony Atkins, the pro tem, Lorena Gonzalez, and others. And so I would like to see us engage them more. If we could get them on a tour, wonderful, but at least, I mean, the paper here, although it's a shrinking readership, but they just regurgitate what is in the LA Times by Mr. Verdabedian. I just think we need to have a greater offensive down here for a couple of important reasons.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I will tell you that I believe you'll see more of that soon. We have hired very recently a number of new staff in our Southern California office under LaDonna DiCamillo's direction, and we're getting them up to speed on the project. They're very talented individuals, and I think that they're aggressive in their approach, and they're going to be helpful in getting outreach and more media attention for the good work going on in Southern California.
And just one last thing, Melissa, I come from the Tip O'Neill School, which is that all politics is local. And while it's great to be on Tokyo TV, I think that is wonderful. Maybe taking a look at some of the grassroots ways of local newspapers. I know that people here will read their community newspaper before they read the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal. So it is a good way to get our message out, because they are more likely to be either more objective or to actually print what we offer them. So those are just 2 quick comments, and I'll reserve for another time, a conversation about other things, because we are running out of time.
Definitely. And I would welcome a conversation with you about your thoughts on news outlets that we should be doing a better job of reaching out to in your region. Happy to do that.
Okay.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Seeing none, thank you so much again for that presentation. Did I miss someone? All right, we'll move to agenda item number 5, small business update. And we did have comments earlier from Ms. Uden about some issues regarding SBE, DBE, and DVBE. So please maybe address that as well.
Nancy, sorry, Nancy, it's Brian. If I could, I want to introduce Katrina Blair to the board who will do this presentation. She is our point person on working with the Small Business Advisory Group and others that we work with on our small business goals and policies. This is an informational item for the board today. We are looking at proposing changes in how we do our small business work to make sure that, one, we are meeting not just a small business objective, but we're meeting the goals and objectives that come with state and federal contracts, and that we meet the state policies. And so she's going to outline proposed changes that we are talking about and speaking to the small business folks about. We have not settled on this policy yet, but we wanted to bring the dialogue to the board now, let you know what we're considering and why, and then we'll come back with an action item when we're further along with all parties affected by this. But the idea is to make sure that we are describing our goals and executing our goals in a way where we are meeting the objectives of federal and state statutes at a minimum, and exceeding those where we can across the board. And every contract has a bit of a different requirement. And so we want to make sure that we have an aligned policy with those requirements. Now, all of that said, Katrina knows we'll forget more about this than I will ever know. So I want to have her go through the presentation with the board. And I appreciate the timeline we're on. So we'll move as quickly as we can on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Greetings, board members and Vice Chair Miller. My name is Katrina Blair. I'm the Chief of Process and Program Development, and I oversee the Authority Small Business Program. I came to the Authority in 2018 as the department's small business advocate, and I worked with the Small Business Program with DGS for over 11 years and over 6 years in the Caltrans Office of Civil Rights and Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. So the purpose of this presentation is just to present and discuss the need for possible improvements to the Authority's Small and Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. And as Brian stated earlier, I want to start off by emphasizing that this presentation is an informational update with the intent of coming back and presenting an actionable item in the future. So the Small Business Program was created during the design phase of the project. So now that we're well into construction, my team and I have been able to assess the program, and we've discovered some inconsistencies in the way that the Authority applies its small business goal and how the 30% is being interpreted. So after meeting with stakeholders and other state departments, we have a better understanding of where we need to make improvements. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is we want to bring clarity to how the goals are applied on the project. We want to align the program with state and federal statutes, and we want to update the program so it's consistent with what other state agencies are doing. So next slide. So the Authority's small business program recognizes 6 certifications. So I want to explain these certifications just for context. In the administration of our small business program and the 30% overall goal, we are mandated by state and federal standards. So when the small business community sees the 30% overall goal, it's not immediately evident that the 30% goal encompasses all of these listed certification types. So we have found that it is not widely known that the state and federal certifications listed have their own set of requirements in terms of funding source, compliance, utilization, which I'll discuss shortly. So High-Speed Rail is not a certifying agency, so we accept certifications administered by other state agencies. And as stated earlier, the 30% overall goal includes all of these certifications listed in both boxes. So when we're applying the goals, all of these designations have to be considered. So for the state certifications on the left, DGS is the administrator and the oversight agency for the state certification program for disabled veteran business enterprise, micro business, and small business for the purpose of public works, which is a newer designation as of January 2019. So these 4 designations are required by the state of California for all projects containing state funds. So for DVBE, Military and Veterans Code establishes a 3% DVBE goal. For small business, micro business, and small business for purpose of public works, we call SBPW, we follow the government code and executive order, which requires a 25% small business goal on all contracts with state funds. So for the federal certifications on the right, Caltrans administers the DBE program statewide, also known as the CUCP certification program. They're the recipient of federal funds specifically for the DBE program and follow the Title 49 of Code of Federal Regulations, Part 26, which is specific to transportation. So we, as the authority, are also required to follow the best practices of 49 CFR Part 26. This regulation establishes a minimum 10% goal required for DBEs. The DBE designation is based on socioeconomic status and recognizes several groups as having presumed socioeconomic disadvantage. And those groups are women, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, subcontinent Asians, and other minorities found to be disadvantaged by the SBA. And lastly, we currently recognize the U.S. Small Business Administration 8A Disadvantaged Business Program certification. However, we don't have any businesses on this project using the certification. So although it's a federal designation, it is not recognized in 49 CFR Part 26. Therefore, there's no stated goal requirement for this designation in terms of the transportation certification standard. So moving forward, we not only want to bring clarity to how our goals are applied, but we also want to recognize those certifications that are required under the California state standard and the federal transportation standards. And so we'll see what that looks like in a future slide. So next slide. So we always like to highlight the amount of businesses that we have on the project, but we can always do better. We did just release new numbers for August, but as of July, we have 634 small businesses working on the project. Next slide. So we did an evaluation of the small business program, and in our evaluation, we looked at other state departments who all have robust small business programs and construction contracts. And we reviewed how they apply their goals. So specifically, the Department of General Services and Caltrans. DGS, who is also our procurement oversight agency and business manager for the state of California, receives state funds and applies state goals on all applicable contracts. Caltrans, on the other hand, who receives both federal and state funds, applies both federal and state standards. So we at the authority endeavor to model their successful small business programs and apply goals in a similar manner, which I'll explain in detail in an upcoming slide. So slide 6, or next slide. So the small business team is successful because of collaboration. We're involved with several interagency work groups. We work closely with stakeholder groups and other state agencies, and they have been instrumental in helping us to establish best practices for small businesses, as well as providing valuable input and recommendations for improvements for our program. So some members of the BAC, or Business Advisory Council, have expressed support for the proposed changes. And through our constant engagement with this group, we continue to receive feedback and recommendations. And just to acknowledge the public comment from Member Uten, her concerns will actually be addressed later in a later slide, but I want to reemphasize that this is just an informational update, and we will work with the BAC through any of the concerns raised. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, I have met with the listed state agencies, and they are in support of the proposed changes that will bring our small business objectives into alignment with the state and federal guidelines followed by their respective agencies. We intend to continue discussions with our peer review group and Business Advisory Council so that we can ensure we have a transparent and responsive small business program that has been strengthened by the incorporation of stakeholder feedback. Next slide. So we've identified several challenges with the 30% overall goal that we're actually just trying to correct. As I mentioned earlier, the 30% overall goal can be a bit confusing because it's not obvious that the goal actually encompasses several state and federal programs. It's often perceived as too high because it combines all small business types under a single overall goal. When looking at the Authority Small Business Program, we state that the 30% overall goal is inclusive of 10% DBE and 3% DVBE. This unfortunately brings further confusion because it implies that there are no other certification categories, but as I demonstrated earlier, we currently track 6. We are commonly asked to clarify what happens to the remaining 17% after the DBE and DVBE goals are applied. So technically, the 17% left after those goals are applied can be credited to any small business certification type. So all of the previously mentioned certification types. But unfortunately, that's not what's explicitly stated in the small business program, which is what we want to further clarify. An additional challenge to the 30% overall goal is that it is not entirely clear in the small business program or in our small business goal that there are required goals specifically for California. And lastly, the most notable challenge is how we refer to small business as the authority. The authority refers to all certification types of small business. This especially is problematic with the Disabled Veteran Business Enterprise designation. In the authority's small business program, the authority counts Disabled Veteran Business Enterprise as a small business, when in fact, there is no gross annual receipt requirement for DVBEs. Therefore, they can actually be a large firm misidentified by the authority as a small. Next slide. So there are risks to lumping multiple small business and DBE and DVBE goals into one overall goal. As I mentioned earlier, we have specific goals associated with state and federal standards that need to be met. So we don't want the ambiguity of how our goals are applied to put us at risk of not meeting our mandated state and federal requirements. Next slide. So why separate the goals? Well, after our review and assessment, my team and I determined that the best approach to resolving many of the inconsistencies and challenges is to separate the goals and model departments like Caltrans and DGS. We want to eliminate the confusion due to combining the state and federal programs and bring distinction and clarity. And we also want to remove the risk of being non-compliant with our state and federal mandates. More importantly, we want to align our objectives with the state and federal requirements. Next slide. So a critical issue that can have significant impacts is the potential for misinterpreting the 30% overall small business goal. The authority has always calculated each contractor's small business goal attainment based on total contract dollars or value as required by the state and federal regulations. Despite this, some authority contractors have requested clarification in how the 30% overall goal is calculated. So more specifically, contractors have asked whether the DBE goal and the 3% DVBE goal is calculated separately against total contract dollars as shown in example 1, or as a percentage of the 30% small business goal value as shown in example 2. So as you can see in the example 2, it drastically reduces the dollar value for DBE and DVBE, and that's certainly not what we want. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the 30% overall small business goal is not overtly clear that there's several certification types that actually make up the 30%. Therefore, the common misconception is that the 30% is applied as one percentage across the board rather than being applied according to state and federal standard. So we're proposing just to discontinue the use of the term 30% overall goal, but instead express each goal separately on each project by funding source, which is consistent with how DGS and Caltrans are separating goals, also separate goals based on federal and state requirement. So we recognize that in separating the 30% goal, to some it might appear as though we are reducing the goal, but in fact, what we're proposing is to maximize small business, disabled veteran business enterprise, disadvantaged business enterprise utilization by increasing some of the goals. So for example, for 100% state-funded contracts here on the slide, the standard is 3% DBBE. So what we're proposing is an increase to 5% DBBE. We'll also apply the mandated 25% small business goal using all categories that qualify under the state standard, which includes small business, micro business, and SBPW, which is small business for purpose of public works. So for 100% federal funded contracts, the standard is 10% DBE. We're proposing an increase to 17%, which models the Caltrans program. Their goal at the end of the fiscal year was roughly about 17%, 17.6%. Member Uden had mentioned that it was 18%, but we did a check and it's 17.6. So we want to model what Caltrans is doing. So for blended contracts that contain state and federal dollars, we're proposing to follow the state and federal standard. And I just want to note that most of the authority contracts are blended. And the state and federal standard is 3% DVBE, 25% small business, again, which includes small, micro, and SBPW, and 10% DBE. So just to briefly address the public comment, I just want to point out again that currently all of the authorities contracts are either blended or 100% state funded. So there will be no decrease to DBBE. We are proposing that we actually increase the DBBE goal from the standards of 3% up to 5%. So the authority also currently has no 100% federally funded contracts, but in modeling the Caltrans method of applying goals, 17% DBE on a 100% federally funded contract is the standard. So in our assessment of other state departments, we didn't find any other departments that had a federal DBBE goal, as mentioned by member Uden earlier. Additionally, there are no California statutes that give state agencies authority to count a federal DBBE certification towards state or federal projects. So in terms of counting DBE participation on state-funded contracts, as Member Uden mentioned, that would be a violation of Proposition 209, as she suggested. And this type of change will require a change in California law, actually. So we will certainly work closely with our legal team to understand what our authority is in all of the areas that she mentioned. And I'll work with the Business Advisory Council on this concern as well. Next slide. And I also want to emphasize that the changes that we're proposing are just changes on future contracts. So none of our current contracts will be impacted by these changes. Next slide. So what are the benefits? Simply put, we will have a more straightforward and transparent program with goals that are achievable and aligned with the state and federal guidelines consistent with other state departments. Next slide. And for the aforementioned reasons, the small business team proposes to come back to the board to consider our proposal to make changes to the small business program as follows. We want to separate the goals from the federal, separate goals from state and federal goals, and implement goals based on the source of funding. We want to revise the small business program plan to align with other state agencies. We want to conduct a complete overhaul of the small business program as necessitated by current project needs and evaluation outcomes. And we want to update the authority, policies, and procedures to reflect the approved changes. Next slide. So in closing, I just want to reiterate that the proposal is informational and is a starting point to a necessary conversation. We have every intention of meeting with our stakeholder groups to hear their concerns, definitely before we bring an action to the board. And this concludes my presentation. And at this time, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that. And thanks for the clarification regarding the member of the public that spoke. Questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure, Ernie.
It seems to me that, and I was involved in a lot of federal contracts, that the federal contracts, at least under SBA, the aid status, governs or is a certification that is accepted by all agencies and is the overriding certification, whether it be Caltrans or local or usually local or state contracts. Is that still the case?
Well, there is a unified certification program administered by Caltrans. That's the DBE program. And Caltrans administers the program statewide, but there are several local agencies throughout California that accept that particular certification, but it's specific to transportation-related projects.
Yes, and you mentioned CFR 29, I guess part 26 or
CFR 49, part 26.
Yeah, but if in fact you're talking about state contracts that have 100% state money, but once you interject federal money, then for compliance issues, we have to go by the federal guidelines, which are SBA guidelines, which are going to designate under the aid program is very clear. And that those are governed either by size standards or revenues are governed by an SAIC code. And then in addition, I mean, we can go offline on this, but I'd love to talk to you about that. But I'm wondering who monitors compliance of this. Many of these firms could graduate from a size standard standpoint and no longer be considered small. So how are we replacing those and who's monitoring those?
The authority's compliance team is actually monitoring utilization, and they track whether a firm has graduated from the certification program. So before
is that a self-performing audit where they will then tell you I have now graduated, or is somebody actually monitoring it?
No, someone is actually monitoring. So before a small business is added to the project, they have to go through an approval process. And part of that approval process is checking whether or not they have valid certifications. So we go directly to the agency to make sure. So that's before before they're added or before the contract goes into an amendment and they're adding more small businesses. We're always evaluating their certification status.
One last comment, and then I'll try to reserve everything else to go offline with you. We're talking about construction contracts, which are going to be different size standard than professional services contracts. So when we take a construction contract with a value of $50 million, that may be under a certain NAIC code, just by revenues will be greater than the size standard allows. But over a 3-year average, and they will graduate from the program maybe in 2 years or something like that. And then professional services may be governed by a different size standard.
So the SBPW, the Small Business for Purpose of Public Works, the certification designation that I mentioned earlier, DGS just implemented this certification in 2019. And that size standard is 36 million over a 3-year average, and it actually exceeds the federal standard. So
that's 25 million, I think.
Yeah. So all businesses on the high-speed rail project can apply for this certification. It's a self-certification administered by Department of General Services.
Okay, thank you. I'll reserve everything else for offline, but thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. When you bring it back, I mean, maybe some of the other board members, I know they would agree with me that you can also ask for our diversity policy that we ask contractors to do. I know it's a completely different thing than the certification process that you've talked about today, but it's also, I know that we do it as part of our contracting. So I think it'd be nice to bring that back too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move now to the CEO report, agenda item 6.
Thank you, Nancy. I will move quickly here, mindful of time. Mostly just want to update the board members on a recent conclusion of a settlement that was important for us to avoid CEQA-related litigation. And that is the board members. So I'm going to jump right into this. The board members may recall when we approved the Central Valley Y, we had several communities that we were working through agreements with concurrent with that approval. And just last week, I'm happy to report that we settled the last of those settlement issues with the city of Madera. Again, the last sort of remaining party that we had to settle with to assure that we get through that process without CEQA litigation. Now, the NEPA clock is longer and there can still be challenges related to NEPA, but I can report with the conclusion of our agreements with Fairmead, Chowchilla, Merced County, the Chowchilla Elementary School District, and now the city of Madera, we have completed all settlements in that area and will not see CEQA litigation related to the adoption of the Y environmental document. So I just wanted to update you on that. That's the latest agreement in that area. Secondly, next slide, please. I wanted to quickly go through what's coming up for the board members, things that you will hear from us. As I mentioned, we will do the Central Valley update, similar to what you heard from Northern California today. This one will be construction focused. There are some important things in analysis that we are undertaking today that I'll be updating the board on in November. So again, we'll have the Central Valley construction update. The final Burbank to LA environmental document will be released publicly so that we can bring that ROD consideration back to the board in January. And those are the two sort of biggest items that we have pending in November. December, as I noted earlier, we'll do the Southern California project update. And then in January, the environmental document itself will be before the board for Burbank to LA environmental document consideration, certification of that ROD. Lastly, in spring, looks like right now we're sort of targeting March and May, but we're paying close attention to make sure we're ready. But that's where you'll see the environmental documents certification question will come before the board for Merced to San Jose and San Jose to San Francisco. So there's a lot before us in that early second quarter of 22 on the environmental side. And I just wanted to flag these upcoming items for board members today. Okay. Next slide, please. Quickly, this is a look at our schedule for 2022 in terms of board hearings. We're looking at, as we've been doing this month and next month, the third Thursday of the month, generally is what we've targeted. We're looking at a 2-day in January, 19th and 20th, and that is tied to the bringing forward the ROD certification for Burbank to LA. And tentatively with asterisks here on this list, March and May also look like 2-day board hearings for consideration of the environmental documents in Northern California, the Bay Area. So this is the schedule that we lay out for our hearings in 2022. And again, those 2-day board meetings are tentatively set here and denoted by the asterisks. And again, as we go through the schedules and make sure we're ready, we'll clarify those, come back if we need to, but that's where things stand now. That's all I have. Oh, one more thing I think.
Brian, I'm sorry, do you anticipate that January will still be virtual?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I believe unless something changes, we have a authority under state law to continue this process through the month of January. Okay. So it looks like we try to get back to again, if nothing changes, we try to get back to in-person meetings in February. Okay. All right. And I guess the last thing I have is just a quick quote that was said yesterday. I think Justin's got this ready to go, but you guys can hear it. Last night, President Biden was answering some media questions about high-speed rail, just to end on a positive note. I think there's an opportunity for you guys to hear that here, but he was asked a question about his view on high-speed rail, and he gave this answer. So I'm going to look to Justin to see if he's got this ready to go. Maybe not. Well, there it is.
Chinese are now building another high-speed rail line and will go up to 300 miles per hour. You say, what difference does that make, Biden? Well, guess what? If you can get in a train and go from here to Washington much faster than you can go in an automobile, you take a train. You take the train. We will take literally millions of automobiles off the road. Off the road. saving tens of millions of barrels of oil, dealing with cleaning up the air. This is not hyperbole, this is a fact. These are facts. Do you realize the Chinese are now building another high-speed rail
That's it.
line 300 miles per hour?
All right. You get the gist. Asked the question of the value of high-speed rail. That's the answer he gave last night. We just came across it. Thought I would share it with the board. And with that, Madam Chair, I am done.
Okay. Well, nothing like a little
Thank
bit
you.
of adrenaline.
Any questions?
Yes, one comment, Brian.
Yeah, I didn't freak out. I just knew that it was
Oh,
gonna be, I mean, I'm trying.
Yeah.
Someone is
Brian,
speaking.
If you're not earning, you should be muted.
A little bit more.
Go ahead.
sense.
Sorry, Ernie, you're on mute.
But yeah, this happens every once in a while.
I think
Yes,
that
there
might
we
be
go.
Henry that's
The
background.
first slide,
these guys are all talking.
the first slide you had, you talked about Fairmead.
Yes.
Is that problem is resolved? So have we funded that? Or is there?
Well, there are several elements in, we do not hand over cash in advance of
Okay.
work. There are several elements of that agreement that require physical work to be conducted.
Okay.
So we do that on a reimbursable basis generally. There
Okay,
may
I
be
just
some-
wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of Brian? Moving on to the report from the Finance and Audit Committee, which is item number 7. I'm going to be very quick with this. We had a report from Paula Rivera about a follow-up to our 2018 California State Audit, just a corrective and to make sure we're in compliance. We were substantially in compliance. However, there were a few areas that needed to be brought into compliance. We had Jeannie Jones on as well, our authority's chief administrative officer, responding that the recommendations are being implemented and the policy updates that are needed are underway. And most of these were not substantive. They didn't involve issues of funding or timing. It was mainly what was in the file and, certain elements of the file as it goes along the process. The financial report was presented, indicated the authority had received $252 million from cap and trade from the August auction, and the next auction is scheduled for November 17th. And then we received the Central Valley status report, an update, which the full board will hear in November, I believe. And mainly that dealt with how we're doing on right-of-way and working on the assessment of delivery dates for the remaining 300 parcels, although recent months have seen an uptick in the number of parcels acquired. That's it for me on the F&A report. And now we will adjourn into closed session for agenda item number 8, unless anyone has a question about the F&A report.
No, just a comment, Nancy. Thank you for doing such a great job of chairing our meeting. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lynn. All right, so we have a different website or Zoom call you need to log on to go to closed session. So if you don't have that, can you let Natalie know right now so she can send it to you?
Yeah, Natalie, could you send it out again?
Are we going immediately into closed session, Nancy?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Great
wait a
job.
minute.
Great job,
We
Barbara.
might need a break. Let's say we'll meet in closed session in 10 minutes. All right.
Got it.
So 1:40?
Yes, 1:40.
Okay, yeah, and Natalie, are you on? Can you please send it out?
Yes, I'm sending it now, Lynn.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good job, Nancy.
Bye all. Bye-bye. Great job.
See you all in closed session. Hello. We're back in session after our closed session, and I'd like to report there was no action taken. Or do you
Just
need,
a sec-
Alicia?
Apologies, Nancy, Madam
Oh, there
Vice
you
Chair,
are
just
now.
1 second. Yeah,
Okay,
we got to tee up for the video streaming, guys.
got it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
That was perfect, Nancy.
Okay,
It's good practice.
Let me know when you guys are ready and we can go live.
we're ready.
You're live.
Hi, we're reconvening the California High-Speed Rail Authority meeting after a closed session, and I'm reporting that there was no action taken in closed session, and our open meeting is now adjourned.